Hey there, Marcelina. Hope you're having a great day today. Hey, Mary. I'm excited for your session tomorrow. Hey, Betty. Before we get started, I'd love for you guys to let me know what's the weather like in the area you're in right now. I think in Toronto, it's snowing. It's weird, a little drizzle here and there, and then the ground has a lot of snow in it. It's interesting.
Definitely a little bit of cold weather outside right now.
Sunny in New Jersey. Man, that's awesome. Okay, we'll get started in maybe another minute. Hey there, Annette. Okay, so I just want to say good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Changemaker20. And I want to thank you guys again for spending your afternoons with us. If this is your first time, this is a platform where we get to chat with our subject matter experts in an open forum for all of you guys to ask any questions and speak to them directly. And so if you guys do have any questions, please definitely leave them down below on our chat. And just something a little bit about our chat, when you go into it, click the to, and rather than it being to only panelists, click all panelists and attendees. I'd love to make this an open conversation with you guys and everybody else as well. Today, we have Drew Taylor. Drew is the co-founder and chief executive officer at Acorn Biolabs. And not only is Drew a biologist, but also a former professional athlete. He is an ex-Toronto Blue Jay. And so, I mean, his repertoire has charted a path across molecular cell biology, science, baseball, all with a steadfast passion in his career. And as if his bio isn't already impressive, he is also an award-winning filmmaker with TIFF. So Drew, we didn't just ask you to come in today to put us to shame, but to talk a little bit about the fragility of our health and how much farther we are from taking necessary steps forward. And so perhaps maybe you can give us a rundown a little bit of what you do at Acorn, and then we can go from there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the killer introduction there. I don't know how the talk's going to live up to that, but essentially my path into Acorn started all the way back in around grade 7. I ended up having the amazing opportunity to actually witness a surgery. So I was able to go into the OR and watch a total knee arthroplasty, which is where we actually replace the internal mechanisms of the knee, the cartilage and the bone, with metals and plastics to try and restore function for people that have either had a traumatic injury or have actually had osteoarthritis throughout their lives. And that moment was unbelievably impactful for me, watching the surgical team work together. It was incredible, but the thing that actually resonated the most with me and I guess, for lack of a better expression, blew my mind was actually watching that patient who I witnessed come in a wheelchair, walk to greet the surgeon within 24 hours after that surgery.
Wow.
So it kind of charted a path of this was exactly what I wanted to do with my life. And I ended up jumping straight into that as a career in going down the pathway of both orthopedics, but actually on the biomedical engineering side. So how can we make these surgeries, these implants better? And the direction that I took was actually replacing the components with cellular material. So instead of using metals and plastics, let's actually use a patient's own cells, because that will actually allow that patient to have the same functionality. Hopefully will last indefinitely, because it can repair, respond to shear forces and stresses, heal. And so that was really what drove me into tissue engineering in this space and the use of cells to actually heal ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And you guys have now taken that and you're also pivoting into what's going on right now with COVID. And so I thought that was really interesting. I know you and I discussed that a little bit, but can you give everybody a brief on how you guys are really approaching this pandemic?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. When I was at Mount Sinai Hospital working in orthopedics, I was actually very early in my career when actually we had the SARS outbreak here in Toronto, and there were cases at Mount Sinai. So I did get to experience that. Now, obviously, this is a multiple, worse, but ultimately what is going on in COVID has changed a little bit of our direction right now. what Acorn has been doing is essentially trying to prepare you for the future and the healthcare needs that you're going to need tomorrow. Our cells are a diminishing resource, right? So as we get older, our cells get worse. They break down. They don't have the same therapeutic capacity. And the future of healthcare is really about using our own cells to heal ourselves. One Nobel Prize winning technology, the iPSC, the induced pluripotent stem cell, the ability to take an adult cell and draw it all the way back to becoming that magic moment where sperm meets egg, that embryonic stem cell, along with CRISPR, which I'm sure you've heard about in mainstream media, gets a lot of attention, cut and paste for the human genome. With those two things combined, we technically now have, or theoretically now have, the tools needed to treat any disease. The one limitation is the quality of the starting material that we have, that starting cell to use in those therapies. And so Acorn has been allowing people to cryogenically preserve their healthiest version of themselves for future healthcare needs. And also looking at our genetic makeup so that we can understand more about ourselves, so we can actually prepare for the things that are most likely to come up. It's interesting because we now have crossovers with how the technologies that we use can actually help with the solutions around COVID, or really any kind of viral respiratory infection of this level of severity. So one of the things that we're actually approaching this in 3 different ways. The first is actually identifying in preparation the genetics that we have and the likelihood of how we're going to react to contracting COVID-19. There's plenty of people that are out there completely unsymptomatic, and that is very good to know because ultimately you have the propensity to be a super spreader. Right, so you walk around, you don't know you're sick, you meet a lot of people, you think you're totally healthy, and you're actually getting other people very sick. And then on the other side of the spectrum, people that would react very severely to disease, all sorts of other conditions that you may have, that you may not know or be aware of, but you can identify genetically, could leave you more susceptible to having very severe symptoms. And obviously we know that there are deaths because of the virus. So those are things that are fantastic to identify so that you can actually start to triage patients and understand which ones need care quickly. As we move forward into kind of like the later part of this pandemic, the next part that's going to be important is actually identifying who has had COVID, right? So who has been exposed to the virus and who has antibodies for it, and do those antibodies confer an immunity for that patient so that they cannot contract the virus again. And so we're also looking at antibody testing to be able to determine if you have ever been exposed to COVID and if you do have antibodies against it. So I think those 3 areas really are the end-to-end kind of lifespan of you know, before you get sick, when you get sick, looking at viral RNA and identifying that you are sick, and then have you ever had the virus and are you immune to it now moving forward? So that's where we've dove in, and we're working with a few groups. Before this call, I was talking to Public Health Ontario right now. We're Ontario Public Health. So it's, we run a full ISO lab at UHN. So we have the resources and the staff to be able to be helpful here. And so we're doing what we can.
Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like you guys are really on the bleeding edge of technology that the world needs right now. I mean, people want to get back to work. People want to go back to normal. And so how do you guys really see yourself incorporating and taking this into helping us progress into that new norm? I mean, going back to work isn't going to be easy until we have a vaccine. And so, I mean, I know you guys are doing a lot of work to help us prepare for that. Can you give us a little bit of backing into that?
Yeah, so looking at the vaccine against this is, I would say, is not necessarily Acorn's core set of expertise. What we do a lot right now in identifying the cells to work with for regenerative medicine is actually a lot of genetics work. So the PCR, the identifying the presence of that virus. And then also we do a lot of antibody work. So we have a full suite of antibody staining. Obviously the gold standard right now, as it appears to be evolving, it looks to be ELISA, which is a technique used to identify the presence of antibodies against an infectious disease like COVID-19. And so those are the methods that we really feel like Acorn is poised to actually make a difference in helping to increase the ability, the speed that we're able to test people and give them results back on where they fall in the spectrum, having never been exposed to it, currently sick, or having been recovered and have antibodies against it. And I think that's going to be important in the next phase here as we start to want to go back into public spaces and have interactions with each other socially again. It's going to be integral that we know who is susceptible still to contracting the virus, who is going to react to it the worst, who has already been sick and therefore has immunity to it, and then also identify, who is currently sick right now, right? Because the asymptomatic nature of a percentage of the group that gets this virus is certainly troubling and makes it very difficult to manage.
Yeah, and for everyone tuning in, we'd love to know kind of what your experience has been so far. I mean, leave something down below in the chat, just based on how you guys are working around with working remote, or even just making sure you stay safe and healthy. I mean, a lot of people are pivoting to make this turnaround much faster, and I know Drew's hard at working getting this going. And even before this, you were working on helping us have a better longevity in our health overall. Like,
yeah,
the entirety of what you talked about in the form of collecting ourselves now at our healthiest versus later, and what we can do with that, I think it's incredibly interesting.
And it may be more important than ever. Ultimately, right now, what Acorn was doing is trying to empower a lot of the cell-based therapies that are existing today. So we can already 3D print human skin from a sample or a biopsy of a patient's cells, which if you have your cells stored with Acorn, you can have a younger starting material. Tomorrow, it will be 3D printing kidneys and organs on demand, right? And so having a starting material that's more healthy to bring you a kidney that has a longer longevity was our objectives. But what we're seeing with COVID-19 is actually lung damage after patients recover. And so it's still evolving, and we're still learning as more people recover from this. But right now, there is definitely a lot of talk in the community around the fact that there may be reduced lung capacity or scarring damage to patients' lungs after they recover from the virus. And so that is an issue, because as people age, then those aspects are going to become more and more prominent. And later on, what are some of the effects downstream outside of just the potential right now of getting sick and potentially dying from the disease? What are some of the long-term health implications of this outbreak, and how are we going to be able to manage those things? And so for us right now, we're looking at using the cells that we routinely, and before COVID, we're banking for individuals and looking at how those cells can actually be pushed towards the cells that are needed, that are being seen right now to have damage post-COVID. And so we're working on the solutions that hopefully we will have a resource for people that do have that long-term lung damage after receiving COVID that may only really become apparent much later in life.
And it doesn't help that our ICUs are getting full as well. I mean, all over the place. And so, Mary Trudeau's been asking, there's been a lot of news about testing for COVID-19, but what form does the testing you're speaking about take? Is it a blood test? Is it ready to go, or is it still in the pilot stage?
Yeah, so we're not actively testing today. We're still outfitting the laboratory and converting the space that we have from actually a clean room where we're actually taking samples in and processing them for cryogenic storage into actually a diagnostics laboratory. That does take time, but when you look at this epidemic, I think it's going to be going on for a period of time, and we may see this outbreaks kind of come and go over time. So there's going to be a need for those long term. The type of testing can happen in 3 different ways. So if you want to understand a little bit about how you potentially could react to this, that can be as simple as a sputum samples. So the standard collection that you would do with other DNA testing companies like the spit collection device, or from hair follicles. You can pluck a hair follicle and we can look at the DNA in that hair follicle. As far as diagnosing whether you have COVID today, it's a dual swab. One goes up the nostril and one goes to the back of the throat. It's not totally comfortable. Just to warn you, if you ever do get tested, just to be prepared mentally for it. They do go pretty deep, and that is to essentially try to retrieve viral RNA for us to actually use PCR technique to identify that viral RNA is there, so you're currently sick. Downstream, actually, testing whether you've ever had the virus is a blood test. There's 2 different techniques. The most accurate technique is actually taking blood intravenously. So the draw where you take it from like the other side of your elbow. and you need a few milliliters for that. That's the most accurate method. There are groups that are in none of them are approved, but they're working right now, and we've had a number of conversations with them to see how far that they're along. I think there's a little bit of ways to go to make sure that the sensitivity is the same, but just from a finger prick, a drop of blood from your finger, you could also try to identify the antibodies. So those are the methods right now that are currently being worked on or are already deployed.
And it sounds like what you guys are positioning yourself in post-COVID is also going to be very integral. Just the ability to regenerate lung tissue, or the ability to recover from damage that people are sustaining from recovering from COVID. We're almost at 2 million worldwide right now. And so it's really interesting because no one's really talking about cell regeneration, or no one's really acknowledging that it's going to become this integral part of our long lifespan.
Yeah.
And a healthier lifespan.
And it can be in stages, right? So a lot of people have trouble kind of imagining like 3D printing a human lung for transplantation, but that's not the whole story, right? So some of the lung damage can actually be in the tips of the lungs, the alveoli, where the actual oxygen is pushed over into your blood or pulled into your blood. There's a lubricant that actually exists there that a very specific cell type produces, and damage to that cell type will actually inhibit the ability for that oxygen to make the jump into your bloodstream. And so it could be as simple as actually engineering that cell type, right? Pushing that cell type and giving you a larger population of those cells, not trying to recreate the entire lung, but just give you more of those cells at the site that you need them. Sometimes the solutions can be that simple. So I think that we are a lot closer to actually rolling out these techniques than sometimes what people gather, because they've seen Fifth Element and assembling a human body and like almost in a factory, right? So that kind of idea it can be a lot more simple and elegant to try to restore function.
And it sounds like you guys are kind of at the place where 23andMe or Ancestry was maybe 5 years ago, where now everybody's doing this test to know where they came from and who they're related to. And 10 years from now, we can now have all of our cells stored so that we can repair or regrow organs and tissue, which I think is super cool. But what do you see 20 years from now, as we continue to deal with pandemics? If we can get this going, when we get this going, how will that future look like?
Yeah, I think we're as a community learning a lot from this. I think that it's pushing forward certain areas of science and putting a large emphasis on this. There's no question that there are industries that are suffering, and the economy is definitely going to suffer from this. But again, we will bounce back. But there is an acute awareness of the susceptible areas or the weakest kind of areas in how we roll out healthcare to a lot of people. And when we have big increases in demand for very specific elements of healthcare, how do we scale up our healthcare system to meet those needs? And I think that that's something that we as a company are even learning on the part that we play in that, and the active conversations we're having with government groups about where we can actually help out and fit into essentially overworked infrastructure right now, right? So I think that there is a lot of learnings that are going to be made that allow us to react better the next time that there is either a COVID-19 resurgence or a new and novel new virus that comes out that has the same kind of effects as COVID-19 and other coronavirus. So I think that there's going to be outcomes here that leave us in much better preparation to meet the needs and demands of patients worldwide.
All right. And so, Drew, that really just wraps it up for today. We did say it was going to go by really quickly, and it always does. I want to thank you for coming in today, and I want to thank everybody who tuned in for our Changemaker20, as it is all the time that we have. But if you guys, happen to come up with any questions that you want to ask Drew, I think we definitely need to get him on for a longer session. He has so much content I think we can get through, and it was really tough to put it all today into 20 minutes. So we'd definitely love to have him back. Right? And so definitely send them in, or if you guys want to learn anything from Drew so we can prepare that 45-minute segment with him, definitely send in what you guys want to learn a little bit more about. And so we are going to continue our virtual speaker series this week with another Changemaker20 tomorrow with Mary Trudeau. Mary has dedicated her career to water, and she is a professional engineer with 15 years of experience managing municipal water infrastructure and 15 years experiencing as a consultant, providing advice, bridging science and policy. And so in particular, it encompasses the concern of our water, environment, and protection. She's also going to be talking about a really interesting topic about her personal experience as an engineer and what she's learned about mental health and coping in stressful situations. So I think it's going to be really cool, very exciting, and very relatable as we're all adapting to this new day and age. And so once again, I want to thank Drew for coming in today, and for all of you guys for tuning in. So for everyone at home, take care, stay safe, stay healthy, stay connected, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. Thanks.